All right, folks. So we are officially at 12 o'clock. So I think we are going to get started. Welcome to the August session of Tunnel Talk. We're going to be doing a panel discussion on greenhouse structures today. We don't necessarily have, specific topics in mind. I think we'll really just be running through some questions that I come across and, sort of the panel has come across as well. And then anything you guys also want to contribute or ask yourself. So really today is just supposed to be sort of an open discussion about anything and everything greenhouses. I don't have too much of a preamble for you today, but I just wanted to run through a few events that are going to be coming up. So obviously we have our Tunnel Talk Greenhouse series. I'll be running the roundtable / office hours on August 28th. So for those of you who haven't participated for that, it's really just an opportunity for growers to get together. Whether you want to ask me questions or kind of bounce ideas off each other, whatever your heart desires. So we'll be doing that on the 28th. September 4th, I'll be hosting a session on winter spinach production. We have someone from the States, one of the extension agents from the Northeast there. And she'll just be kind of giving an overview on 3 different operations and how they tackle their winter spinach production. So that'll be pretty cool. And then we'll be looking at water quality for greenhouse production October 9th. We have our off-calf field day coming up September 18th. That'll be happening in Cambridge, Nova Scotia at the Perennia Fieldhouse. This is kind of anything and everything related to split nitrogen management and cover cropping. The third pillar for off-calf is obviously rotational grazing, though I'm not quite sure if that's going to be a part of that particular day. I'll also be hosting a off-calf tailgate meeting, but that's going to be very focused on actual tunnel production. So we're going to be looking at split nitrogen in tomatoes, as well as doing a summer cover crop demonstration in a tunnel alongside some irrigation equipment. So that'll be on the following week, September 25th at Vitalberry Farms, which is just outside Canning. The last one here, I'm giving you quite a good heads up on, but we're in the works of planning some nutrient management workshops or nutrient management planning workshops. We're going to be hosting the same workshop in 4 different locations across Nova Scotia. These are going to be focused on nitrogen management. So how do we, looking at, submitting our amendments, whether it's compost or manure for analysis, and then how do we interpret that analysis to know how much that we should be adding. We'll have a good variety of our specialists will be showing up depending on who registers. So if we have, all the berry folks decide that Berwick is the time, then obviously we'll make sure that our berry specialist is there that day. And really just try to cater those sessions depending on that registration. So if you're interested, that should be up on the website soon, if not currently. And just be sure to kind of designate which commodity group you kind of want to focus on, and we'll make sure that the material is catered to you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And we can turn it over to our panel. So why don't we start off with doing just a quick introduction. We'll start with Norm and then we can jump over to Jackie. If you just want to sort of introduce yourself, your current role, and then give a brief overview of your experience with greenhouses and tunnels, that would be great. So take it away, Norm.
It's a pleasure to be here and partake in this discussion. And so I'm Norm Eygenraam. I own and run Multishelter Solutions in Ontario, and we do a lot of business with the East Coast growers. My experience goes back to 1972 when I started I had a summer job, and and that was when tunnels were first started, and we were bending them around. Sorry, the phone is irritating. Okay. So for 15 years, I worked at 2 different nurseries. So my experience on using tunnels and greenhouses, hoop houses was from a very practical uh, point of view. In 1986, I started selling for another manufacturer. In 1989, I started on my own simply because I wanted a greater level of versatility on what was being offered to the customers rather than these cookie cutter solutions that were coming from the big manufacturers. And that really has been my focus ever since, to address what it is the customer is trying to accomplish and help them to meet their goals by making the changes. All of the things I've learned along the way, I'm very eager to share in that knowledge so that we can help growers prevent uh, sad situations before they happen. So again, that is why I'm here too, to help share in some of that knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Brian Huntley, owner of Maritime Greenhouse Connections. We've specialized in building greenhouses. Steel structures is what we focus on mainly. Um, we've also done an aspect of geothermal with or in other words, climate batteries. We've done over 21 of those over the past 4 years. We got started in 2020, and we've built over 100 greenhouses since.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
And Jackie, why don't we give this a go?
So my background started 30 years ago as a grower in a forest nursery called Scott and Stewart Forestry. So I started out as a grower. So I was involved with purchasing greenhouses, building greenhouses, having them blow down, having snow collapse them, pretty much everything that you could do wrong or have something wrong with a greenhouse, I've experienced it. So about 4 years ago now, I took over as the Harnois distributor for Atlantic Canada, and so I'm doing that as well. Um, so I'm mainly dealing with the Harnois greenhouses. I could hear Brian talk because he builds a lot of the Ovaltech greenhouses for Harnois. So, but but yeah, we can jump into the other discussions now that you
Perfect.
introduced me.
I'm so glad to hear your voice. That's great. Awesome. So question one, what are some of the things that people should be thinking about when we're putting up a new tunnel? So Norm, let's start with you.
So one of the things that I hear quite often is that we're getting less snow now. And so people, by extension, that means they don't have to build them as strong. What I am finding though is we're still getting just as much snow as we were before. It's just we're getting them in bigger dumps. The thing that I think every grower needs to be really, really aware of is that weather is getting more unpredictable all the time. And unless you really make a point of understanding what's going on, there's no way that you can protect yourself.
Okay, so yeah, having a good understanding of sort of the climate that you're growing or going to be growing in is really important. We definitely get a lot of conversations from even like newcomers to Nova Scotia or newcomers to the area, and that's definitely something we should be thinking about is not only even our average precipitation levels, but looking at how much comes down at one time, right? Because that
One
can be
thing that comes up almost always in the conversation when I'm talking to somebody from the Maritimes, like in the first minute or two, is it's really windy here. And it's good to acknowledge that, but then where my part kicks in is that just to make growers aware of, what are the limitations, what are the effects, and what can you do to minimize the negatives.
Absolutely. Brian, what do you think? What are sort of some of those top things that people should be thinking about when putting up a new structure?
Location's the biggest one. I seem to run into this an awful lot. People trying to cut cost in picking a location that's not suitable for drainage. you know, they're a structure. They're there to last. You know, I hear the phrase a lot. It's just a greenhouse, but no, when it disappears from your regular day-to-day work, then it's a big problem. But picking a location that's high, allows good drainage. Also sheltered is another thing that they should be looking for. You don't want to be on top of a hill that's got directions, four wind directions coming at you. If you have a tree line somewhere, those things kind of all fit into picking a good location.
No, absolutely. And I think that, a lot of growers, we saw that last year with the amount of rain in the greenhouse actually seemed to be the
A
one
lot.
thing that, we could consistently produce food in and kind of kept that business afloat. Um,
Yeah.
and we never know when that greenhouse is just going to disappear either, right? So sure,
No.
it's just a greenhouse, but when it comes off the radar, it's a problem.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jackie?
Well, as I look at the radar and look at the
Mhm.
new hurricane coming up our way, I can't help jump back to a couple of years ago when Fiona hit us. Um, so we were able to see essentially some of the things when a greenhouse gets old, it doesn't matter who really the manufacturer is. A greenhouse every year is moving and shaking and everything else. And then these huge wind events are a challenge. So, uh, as a somebody that helps run a nursery myself, we do a lot of mitigation and a lot of things. And Brian's right, site is really important. And to have a greenhouse in a spot now that can get hit by the worst possible winds um, is dangerous now because we are in the line of fire when it comes to these heavy wind events. Um, and the other thing I've noticed for people that have multiple greenhouses is the people that make the mistake of putting them too close to one another, because when you get a lot of snow, you can't remove the snow. So,
Mhm.
so on sites, pretty much what Brian said on, you know, creating a nursery, make sure you leave lots of space and make sure you're in a spot that you're not going to be so much exposed to wind from everywhere. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate you sort of mentioning that forecast coming through. That's definitely not what we want to be seeing middle of August, but I think we all also kind of saw that coming. So why don't we talk about like the best things that we can do to prepare for a wind or hurricane event like that? And we'll start with Jackie this time.
like I said, mitigation is the key. Insurance companies aren't too keen on looking at us anymore, especially after Fiona. But most nurseries weren't insured anyways. So what we do and what I recommend is if the wind can't get in, you have a chance. So I know some people have said that they'll leave their sides up. Um, I never experienced that as being a good thing. So we put everything down and we close it in as tight as we can. We make sure that doors are secured. Roll up sides can't roll up. Like we tie everything down so that 130, 40-kilometer winds, you don't have roll up sides ripping up because they won't hold. And that's the key. When Fiona came, what we noticed was our damage and our issues came from the gable end. Um, for one, I'd always recommend anybody building a greenhouse now, do your gable ends in polycarbonate, and do your corners in concrete at least. So that gives you a chance. What helps with 160 kilometers? I don't know. We're all worried about our houses at that point, so it's a tough one, right? But um, just from experience, I think I've got as high as 140 and gone through without being scathed, without being damaged too much. And to me, losing a sheet of plastic is, I don't get too concerned with 21 greenhouses, 200 by 30, right? If you lose plastic, sometimes that's your weakest point. That might be the best. So
Mhm.
if the winds get too high, I think you got to start thinking about stripping the houses and just hold on. So
No, absolutely. And I think as hard or as painful as it can be to think about, removing plastic or kind of letting the wind go through there, like the structure is the most important part.
yeah.
Um, this is a tricky time for sure, you know, where we do have crops that maybe haven't been picked yet, or we've, you know, we're just kind of getting into that season. So it's really, really hard to think about sacrificing them, and that's really going to be sort of a farm to farm discussion. But if you have tunnels that are, you know, the end of the harvest period, or you're not even using them right now, definitely take that plastic off if you can afford to do so. What do you think there, Brian?
Yeah, some good points there. I hate to pick on anything, but the weakest point I see on all greenhouses, and I've done quite a few different brands. Doors are the weakest point. Um, and it's always a challenge to try to get something that kind of works there. I've always recommended stack whatever you can, or park a vehicle or something in front of them doors just to break the wind. Because once the doors go in, then your problems start. Another thing that we've gone to doing with our business is making sure if you have roll up sides that you can wire lock them. There's one of them things that never really happened in the last few years. We've kind of pushed it, making sure that you can at least lock your sides down, and it helps for the winter. It helps for the winds. You just get a little more thermal mass, or thermal retention, I should say, in the winter time. You're not as drafty. So even air inflation, we found that it wasn't holding enough. And if you had especially the winds beating on that air inflation, it starts lifting. And with all storms, we always lose power. So unless you're right on top of it, once your plastic deflates, you're into another series of problems starting. So yeah, doors and roll-ups, making sure that those things are fastened well. We've even taken to putting wire lock around the doors so people can put just a sheet of plastic over it and wire lock it in. Just adds another layer of protection for that type of stuff.
Awesome, thanks. And Norm, do you have anything else you want to add there?
Oh, I firmly agree that the roll-ups and the doors are the concern. An added element of concern is, okay, so right now, you know, we're on the radar to get another hurricane coming up, and so you want to start closing things up, but the weather is warm. So like if the temperature is 20 or 25 Celsius outside, you know, and you start closing things up for like 5, 6 hours ahead of time, you're going to be doing potential damage to the crop that way. So what the growers really need to do is assess, okay, this is how much time it's going to take me to really do what I need to do, and really make sure you've got that checklist. So you're not trying to figure anything out. You just know exactly, okay, I need 1 hour to do this, or whatever that time frame is. And so when it starts getting a little bit closer in your window, you're also that much more sure that, okay, the storm is going to hit you rather than the storm is going to veer away. Then you can kick into action and bang, 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 get that stuff done.
Yeah, I really like the idea of having a checklist and maybe having a rough idea of the time it takes to get those things done, because the preparation is everything, right?
Your checklist is going to minimize this panic mode
Yeah.
when you've got everything written down. And okay, and that's an important thing after the storm too, is like you're going to learn a couple things, add a couple more points to your checklist, so
Yeah.
that the next time you can be that higher level of prepared.
And I
The
mean,
one,
go ahead, Jackie.
the one thing we did, because I think this will be, I don't know how many hurricanes, I haven't even, can't count them. We go 2 or 3 days out, we look at the forecast, we see where it is. And if we think that the chance is 50% or higher that it's coming at us, we do one side with the prevailing wind, one roll up side, tied down really well, because we don't have the time when we know it's really coming to be able to do all that. I love the idea of a checklist. It's a great idea. But for us, where we have so many greenhouses and so limited, when you know the window that it's coming, it's not enough time for some operators to be able to do it all. So we do one really well, and then that's prevailing wind where it's going to get hit the hardest, and the other side leave open for ventilation, and then go from there.
No, I think that's a great point. Typically, we only have 2 to 3 days where we are for sure going to get hit. And a lot of producers don't just have one greenhouse, whether you have multiple or you have a bunch of different crops, or like you said, you have to prepare your home, you have to prepare yourself for these things happening. Yeah, so I think even like you make your checklist, you don't have to think about it, and maybe even prioritize those things, right? Make sure that you're really big, heavy hitters. If that's parking a truck in front of the door, you know, that takes not very much time. You do it and you walk away. Um, I'm just gonna post something in the chat here. So there was a blog post from the University of Vermont, and it was sort of like a disaster prepare guide. There was some grower feedback on there as well. So the top of the document is kind of just a summary of things that people have found work well for them. And then at the bottom, you kind of have like the individual like grower comments or yeah, just feedback, that kind of stuff. So I don't know if people maybe want to chime in at this point, if you have things that you have done that have found worked really well, or maybe you've done something that definitely did not work well and you would not recommend people doing. That's um, also worth sharing. But the one thing I did like that they mentioned in the document is, you know, assess your plastic even too. Like if you intend to keep the plastic on and you don't plan on taking it off, and you know that there's a hole in it or there's a weak point, or maybe that wiggle wire just wasn't really installed properly in the first place, like this is a good time to, you know, do the best you can to try to seal that up if you do plan on keeping the plastic on.
One thing that I strongly urge people is to really be aware of what direction the wind will be coming from, because you know that will have an impact on like how it hits the structure and how it's going to affect it. One other little tidbit I would just like to add, and add to what Brian said, like he referenced drainage. When when you have a 20-foot wide structure, that means that 10 foot of water is going to go one way and 10 foot is going to go the other way. That means that the edge along each structure gets 10 times as much water as the rest of the property. Wet ground has less holding power. You really need to assess your drainage capacity for these storms going forward. It becomes even more of an issue if like you get a hurricane and then 2, 3 weeks later you get another one. You know, that ground has less holding power, and you need to anchor the anchoring system so that it can perform better, because you can build it as strong as Gibraltar, but if you're not hanging on to it, it's going to leave.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think a few weeks ago we got, at least certain parts of the province got hit pretty hard with even the aftermath or the surrounding weather systems from Beryl. We got tons and tons and tons of water in a short amount of time. Dave here's putting his hand up. He's nodding a lot. So, you know, even that as a weakening aspect, or having to deal with now soggy, wet ground going into a storm like this, we have to be aware of drainage. Drainage is a big thing.
The other thing that I think is very important is to document exactly what has happened, so that like you can start seeing what is happening when, so that you can learn from those things.
And unfortunately, we seem to have a lot of learning opportunities over the last few years. And as much as we're just pulling our hair out and going gray, I do think it's a good, you know, documentation, information, and data is really going to help us figure out what works for each site, right? Every site is different. And it's going to behave a little bit differently, which doesn't make our lives easier.
The other thing is to try to keep your greenhouses maintained. If the gable ends need to be replaced, if they're wooden, watch to see if they're starting to decay. It's impossible to build gable ends 3 days before a hurricane, but it's if you kind of have it on a schedule every few years, you got to look at all these gable ends, you got to replace what needs to be done, then that's what you have to do. So
Yeah, I like that. You know, we have our kind of storm checklist, but maybe we have our regular maintenance checklist, and we just add that into whether it's our every few months we're just really looking at how our greenhouse structures are doing, and maybe where they need a little bit of extra help, for sure. All right. So maybe we've already touched on this, but there might still be something that you guys want to add to this. But are there any non-negotiables when it comes to structure design? Maybe Brian, we'll start with you this time around.
Anchoring is the biggest thing. But again, the gable ends, I've really put a push on in the last couple of years to go with the polycarbonate steel structure. Again, wood rots. It's like a 7-year turnaround in a greenhouse. Even with pressure treated, I've seen them just soft enough that under those extreme weather patterns, they just don't hold. And when do they let go? During that time frame. So going with polycarbonate panels and steel gable ends, long term is going to save you money because if you're hiring us, we're coming in, we're building that once, and that polycarbonate is good for 20, 25 years. So you don't even need to look at that gable end. It's just the roof if you're into polyplastic roof. So yeah, those are kind of the things that if you're asking me, like non-negotiable, like concrete's worth its money and polycarbonate gable ends, those things are just a must-have in my list of things that if it was me purchasing, that's the way I would go with them.
What do you think, Norm?
Yeah, definitely anchoring is my number one non-negotiable. The second non-negotiable is bracing. I see a lot of people, especially with the tunnels, they want to cut corners on the bracing and give Mother Nature an inch of wiggle room. They're not compromised by lack of patience or whatever like we are. If it takes a month, it takes 2 months. If there's wiggle room, it's going to work on it, and it's going to give way when you least want. So really pay attention to that extra anchoring, especially for the corners. The ends of the building it takes probably 75% of the brunt. So you need to have that much extra holding power as far as your anchoring goes, plus the bracing. And the bracing needs to be done in a way that ties everything together so that the load is shared by everything.
I like that. Mother Nature is very patient. It's a good way to put it. What do you think, Jackie?
Yeah, like to describe one morning that I went to Scott and Stewart and two 200-foot greenhouses were ripped out of the ground and sitting in another spot. We had realized that we had decided to build several greenhouses in one year. We didn't plan very well, and it came back to bite us hard. And we selected spots where we could fit a greenhouse. So the non-negotiable for me is make sure you know where you're putting it. Number one, make sure you're, like Brian said, have ground that's good ground, and make sure you have really good anchors. If you can spend the money up front to get all the things you need to have the greenhouse strong enough to be able to withstand what we're going to be going through over the next number of years, you can easily find out the maximum winds and the maximum snow and all the stuff that you need to be able to have a greenhouse that's almost stronger than what you think you need, and and have it prepared for the long run, the long term, because we're into greenhouses that we built years ago and they're not strong enough. So we don't know what'll happen in the next storm and how we're going to prepare, but they're, the new structures that we just put up, we're pretty confident they're strong enough, but the old ones, if we made them stronger, if we did better job on the anchors from the start, we would have been better. So,
yeah. All right.
Can I just pipe in for one thing for a sec?
Yeah, go for it.
One phrase that I've heard a couple of times now is saying, if you can afford it. What I regularly remind people is maybe you can't not afford it, because like this is going to be a problem. And so if you think you can't afford it, maybe you need to just wait a little bit longer so that you can afford it. Because if you cut that corner, you might be saving yourself $100. You might be saving yourself $1,000. But if you save $1,000, you're probably going to wind up spending an extra 5,000 down the road to do repairs. So you really need to be conscientious of what you think you cannot afford, because you
Agreed.
probably.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that's a very good way of putting it. Okay, so we did talk a bit about footing, so maybe we'll just kind of continue on that train of thought. What are sort of the best slash worst ways that we can reinforce these? Or what have we seen that, or maybe tried that we're like, wow, this is going to be great, and it definitely did not work. We'll start with Norm, I think, this time around.
One of the things that I point out to people when it comes to reinforcing the anchoring is that if you have anchoring going in opposite directions, you're actually multiplying the holding power, rather than if you just put anchors into the ground. And in extreme cases, that even, well, okay, concrete, if the pad is big enough, it's not going to lift. But then you have to look at what's the next weakest spot in the chain. But yeah, crisscrossing anchors will multiply the effect.
Brian, I'll toss it to you.
Worst things I've seen, base plates with no anchoring. People seem to think that sticking a 6x6 on the ground and holding your greenhouse to it works. Luckily, I haven't seen any damage from that. Then there's a lot of stuff I haven't seen for damage, but I've done a few jobs where we've replaced base plates and not anchored to the ground, and you've wondered how these greenhouses have stood. But again, we caught most of those prior or previous of Fiona, so I think we kind of cleaned up that. Yeah, concrete is definitely the way to go. One brand in particular has a concrete beam that you get in your plans, and it's engineered. It's overkill, but that's the one thing you don't have to worry about, and it's a structure. So foundation is very key in building anything. So making sure you have a good one. I hear that one a lot. That one's overkill, but where do we dumb it down to and make it not so overkill, but still enough? I don't want to touch it. I want to leave it where it's at. Yeah.
Yeah, nice to be overly cautious when it
Yeah.
comes to stuff like this.
Yeah.
Any other words of wisdom there, Jackie?
I've seen lots of bad things. Some of them I've did myself. One of the anchors that we had was just a rod that went in the ground, just an anchor that went in, and nothing crisscrossed. And it worked great. But as soon as the wind, if it got in a greenhouse, the upward pressure it wouldn't matter how old it was, it just popped it out of the ground. So concrete would be the best. The other one I seen at a nursery that lost multiple greenhouses in Fiona, they used concrete and then they had nothing for 3 or 4 anchors, and then they used concrete again in sonotubes. So it looked really good until you get in there and realize they only had maybe 25% of the anchors that they needed. So if you cut corners, it's not a good idea.
So that almost seems like, I heard that concrete is important, so I'm going to use concrete, but we can't then just rely on that concrete in places, right? We kind of,
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
Yeah, I see a lot of people say, well, if I put some in the front and some in the back and maybe a couple in the middle, there needs to be a reason for doing it that way. I know now, typically now, 3 arches on each end with the gable end in concrete sonotubes that holds your wind bracing, and that distributes that load down through the building. If you're looking for uplift, it's weight versus wind. And when you look at things that fly, it takes a fair amount of wind to lift it, but once it lifts it, it's going. So kind of keep that in mind with concrete. You should be all the way, or at least have a reason for doing it in the certain spots. I know people say 5 feet down is not going to move much, but when it starts to move, it moves, and it moves quick.
Yep.
I remind people that there is a rough resemblance to the shape of a greenhouse and an airplane wing, but you want the opposite result.
Yes.
And so when
yes, you do.
when you fully understand that aerodynamic, then there becomes a whole other level of urgency to your thinking process.
Yep. All right. So we kind of touched on the cost piece a little bit there. And something that I've kind of heard time and time again is the idea of buying secondhand structures as a way to try to reduce the cost or to increase our greenhouse capacity. I guess, are there major things that we should be looking for if we are going to go down the road of purchasing a secondhand structure? And if so, what? I'm going to start you off, Jackie. Number one.
Well, I would say don't do it. Like, so we've done it. And yes, some of them are still there, but the amount of money it costs to buy all the little tiny parts that you need to put the greenhouse together, and Brian can attest to this, you're going to spend a pile of money, and you're still going to have a used structure that's already been exposed to a lot of wind. I hope you save a pile of money because you're going to be paying it in the end, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I had a customer that bought a used greenhouse that was in pretty good shape. They spent several $1,000s to get the parts that they needed to put it together. And as soon as Fiona came through, it was flat on the ground. It didn't even have a chance. And they did everything right. They did everything the way they were supposed to do it. But it just was an old structure. So it's just like an old car. You get what you pay for. So that's my opinion.
Yep. Super fair. Brian, you wanna add on that there?
Yeah, my normal response is don't. I get asked, can you come take a structure down, move it, bring it to our place, put it up? I mean, for me to go in and take it apart is the same price to put it together. So you're already paying twice as much for it right there without paying for the greenhouse. Our weather patterns, we've had some severe storms. We've had a lot of, from snow loads in 2015 to Fiona. There's damage we don't see, structural damage you don't see. And some of you might pick up when you take it apart, others you don't. And then those are the spots that fail because now you've altered how it's sitting on the ground or how it's been put together. To me, it's a big don't. I've had even greenhouses I put up a couple years ago, just for sake of bad luck. The people are getting out of farming and selling them, and I don't even recommend buying them, and they're new just because of it. But one of the big things is if you're set on that, you're all new nuts, bolts, and anchor system right off the get-go. Don't quote me, one of the brands with 100-foot greenhouse, I think it was almost $8,000 for a 100-foot greenhouse, for all new nuts and bolt system and anchors. So it's not recommended. You might as well buy new and know what you have and start right off on the right foot.
What do you think, Norm?
Okay, and one additional point, which is becoming more and more aggravating for a lot of people, is, okay, so greenhouses, like we're building greenhouses stronger than what we did 20, 30 years ago. It's just because of the way things are going. And so when you buy an old greenhouse and then you're in a position where you need to get a permit, and you need to submit some paperwork to the municipality, like, where do you go? When you buy a new building, you can say to the manufacturer, like, I need this or that, and you can an engineer will stand behind it because you know what you're dealing with. When you have a used structure, in a lot of cases, you don't have a leg to stand on, and so you might wind up in a situation where you get it all together, and then you find out that you need to submit some paperwork, and all of a sudden you're stuck, and now you can't use it.
Yeah.
And to that, permits in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, like they have become the thing to get a permit before you even build a greenhouse, and to do a whole bunch of things that I've never even heard of before. So um, it's yeah, it's a real challenge. Like it's a real pain for growers to try to build something now. So
Hmm. Well, and that really, I guess, should be, I guess, then accounted for in a new installation or any installation or expansion plan, is that there is sort of this pile of paperwork that does have to be dealt with before you can even start thinking about putting holes in the ground and
yeah,
getting your structure set up. No, that's very good to know. And I guess so if we kind of, I'll take that tangent, and we can kind of switch gears in a sense, but if we're looking at new growers, we're looking at new entrants to greenhouse production, um, are there sort of some common mistakes that you hope people would be conscious of? And we might have already touched on that, so that's okay if we've already talked about it. But is there something that we're seeing with sort of these new to greenhouse producers that we really wish we could stop? Help people be a bit more prepared. Um, why don't we start with Norm this time?
Yeah, I can't stress enough the importance of being prepared. And I think especially for new growers, they might ask the question, okay, well, how do we be prepared? And so they're thinking about, like how they're going to grow things, how they're going to, a bunch of the different things that they need. But, not realizing how they need to be aware of drainage, how they need to be aware of aerodynamics, how they need to be aware of, what windbreaks will do, all of these different points with anchoring. It's just, when I hear somebody say, that's strong enough, that ain't gonna move, and then I just cringe because they're just automatically taking something too lightly. And just, yeah, the importance of that background education is what I can't emphasize that enough.
And so, yeah, it's not necessarily about, what structure you're buying and how you install it, but there's sort of all of this other things around your structure, like the drainage, like the wind breaks, like the position and the direction that we're putting this thing, that we should be thinking about as well.
And so one thing that we haven't covered yet, and like we've been talking about, like this anchoring and stuff like this, and how this now ties into sort of the new growers. A lot of the new growers are wanting to go with these movable structures because now you can get a crop out of location A, and then you can get a crop out of location B and maybe C. And so, you want something that's easy to move, but then how can you emphasize the anchoring then? You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it really puts them in a tough spot to try and accomplish multiple things without sacrificing to the point that there's going to be tears and hardship.
And when you say movable tunnel, are you talking like a caterpillar tunnel, or we're looking more something like you physically are like pushing and moving?
Both,
Okay.
because like the intent of the actual caterpillar tunnels is to move them. And so, there's not much holding them in the ground. And so you really need to be aware of what the limitations are. But we're getting people too that are putting them on skis so that they can physically slide them from one location to the next. And of course, when you release it from the anchors, it's in a very vulnerable state. And so how do you resecure it securely so that it's not an issue when that storm comes?
Yeah. Brian, you have anything? Are you able to chime in?
Yeah, I was trying to get my guy to grab a piece of wire lock. New growers, I actually see it with old growers. Wire lock installed wrong.
Hmm.
Upside down. If you look at a piece, I don't know if he's found a piece. I don't think so. When you hold it upright on the ends, if the tab on the very end, if it's down, you want that on what we call the non-load bearing side. So for air inflation, that's everything above that. You want to make sure those tabs are down on the trim side of the plastic. Because what happens when the wind starts hammering at things, or even the air inflation, I've just seen the air inflation pop those ends out, and it literally sounds like a zipper ripping when those let go. And I've seen it. One of my one of my first jobs, what we did back in 2020, we played with the wind a little too much. We got stuck in a spot where we thought the wind was going to come in later in the afternoon, and we pulled an end wall up, and then we pulled the cover because we only had one side of stage, and we were trying to do things cheap. It almost cost me $3,000 in plastic. The wind come in the open end, and just took this sheet of plastic, and it was all we could do to hold it. Not a good scenario, but I've seen it with those wire lock ends up. They pop out and they let go. Um, Making sure that stuff is checked on weekly is my biggest thing too, because even though it's new, sometimes there's a bad batch. I've seen that several times last year. We would walk away and a week later they'd call, like, my wire lock's popped out. So the back end, throw that out. Like, don't even reuse wire locks. Get rid of it. Um, it's just not worth playing with. Make sure you're using it right, and use new when you redo your roof.
Okay, that's a good one. Jackie,
Yep.
what do you think?
For new growers, what they need to do is really look at what they're going to be growing. So let's say they want to buy a greenhouse from me or from Norm or whatever. So what are you going to grow? What do the conditions have to be? You can't grow 20 different types of plants a lot of times in a small greenhouse because some of them ask for different conditions, whether it become heat, ventilation, what have you. But we have a lot of new growers that are coming in. They all want to do a whole bunch of different things at once. Ventilation is probably one of the most important things because this has been a hot summer. Understand that ventilation is just as important as your structure staying up in a windstorm is being able to keep your crops healthy and growing inside your greenhouse when you have the proper conditions. So, I would always recommend anybody new going to Prenia and ask them about what conditions they need, what crops they should grow. And the old saying is, if you can't sell it, don't grow it. So, but for new growers, it's exciting when you build a new greenhouse, but it's not exciting when you have a crop failure because of poor ventilation and poor planning. So
Yeah, and I'll kind of jump in on that ventilation point as well. What I really like to see end wall ventilation. So we talk a lot about roll-up siding, and that's a really common way to try to get air through that space. But hot air rises, and so it kind of can get trapped up in that peak if we don't have any way for it to get in and out. So I really like to see something above your door on one side and then on the other so that we can really just try to flush that hot humidity out of there and just help a little bit there. Do you guys have any sort of venting 101 snippets for those who are?
Well, what you just talked about is something that I emphasized a lot for the combination with the roll-up sides, is because when you have that calm day, and we've got lots of wind event days, but there are calm days, and you've got that intensely hot pocket up there, you need to have a release for that hot air up high. And so every structure, especially ones with roll-up sides, need to have an easily managed opening above the doorways as high as you can on both ends. And that can become your number one way of ventilating. So like when you've got a sunny day in February that you need to get rid of some moisture, especially when you want to get rid of some moisture, open that and like for 5 minutes, and it's amazing the amount of moisture you can get rid of. But when you've got that calm day and you've got those openings there, they become like a chimney where they suck that hot air up, and so you're still getting air movement even on the calm days.
Yeah, definitely. Did you guys, Jackie, Brian, did you want to chime in there as well?
Yeah, where you can, roof vents. I know not every structure carries them. Not every brand carries them, but even some of the structures, it's the smaller ones, you can't get them. But if you can get a roof vent, um, that would be, kind of one of my next things down the list to put on, because you can open that up. Like you said, heat rises, and you could expel that heat quick. Again, those are not cheap add-ons, but um, over time they may pay for themselves quite quickly if you're able to expel that heat and get a little extra out of your crops.
Mm-hmm.
And what side you have that on is then it's even more important to know where's the wind coming from. Because
Definitely.
you don't want to be opening this up, into the wind so that the wind just gets driven in.
Yeah, so the mid-roof vent works well for a greenhouse, and Norm's right. You have to be, you have to be aware of where the wind is normally coming from. The other option too is, besides a ventilation fan and a louver in the top, is a positive pressure fan that pulls air from outside in through a vent tubing onto the peak, and it moves the air around, and then using horizontal airflow fans to kind of keep moving that air around. So um, it's become hotter for greenhouses. Um, Also looking at you've got the ideas of maybe doing some shade cloth and some other stuff like that to try to cool things down, but it's become a hotter summer. Every day seems like it's above 30 degrees. I mean, we've already hit 47, 48 humidex, and it's almost impossible in in those conditions to really cool a greenhouse to where your crops are happy. Like they're just sitting there. They're not doing anything. They're just hoping to get through the day. So
No, I think that highlights a great point. I think when we talk about greenhouses, we talk a lot about season extension, we talk a lot about winter growing and year-round production. But that summer period can be really, really, really tricky. And we kind of have to factor that into, the crops we want to grow in there and our plan to help manage that. And there are different things we can do. Venting is a great one. Different types of fans, shade cloth. We can look at things like a whitewash, which is kind of a coating on the outside. So we do have options, but it is tricky because we live in such a humid climate as well. I think that makes it difficult for certain technologies to work. So things like fogging is quite successful in other regions, or using these cooling pads, but with a high humidity, it's not going to do very much for us. So definitely worth sort of adding that into your planning conversation. Um, I have a question here. Why isn't rainwater collection, storage, and reuse not included in the design and construction of greenhouses? Cisterns inside the greenhouse perimeter are great anchors and reduce frost. So why don't I toss that to you first, Brian? I think you've been the middleman for a while here.
That's all right. Sorry, I just got pulled out there. Somebody was flagging me down. So what was that question again? Just a quick recap on that.
Yeah,
I didn't
why
quite
isn't
hear.
rainwater collection, storage, and reuse not included in the
Okay.
design and construction of greenhouses?
I've had that one asked an awful lot, actually. People seem to want to put gutters on the side of a greenhouse. Um, and it's always just above the roll up, which is in theory a good spot, but snow's got to slide. I mean, even in your gutter connect greenhouses, your big industrial commercial greenhouses, they hold snow. So unless you're heating them and they're fastened really well, they're a hindrance for collection there. Um, I've had some customers, I don't know if they've ever gone back and done it. They wanted to put it on the ground and collect, kind of runoff. Um, I mean, most scenarios I've seen, there's usually a pond on most farms, and it's downstream, as I call it, from the greenhouse. It's a great idea. Tile it off and gather that water. You need a place for it to run, but again, I think it was Norm said earlier there. There's twice as much water hitting, or so many times more water hitting that outside edge. It's got to be able to be gathered quickly and removed, so it doesn't cause other issues down the road. But yeah, I haven't really seen any good designs in gathering rain from a greenhouse that other than like I say, the gutter connects that already have it built in.
Mm-hmm. Jackie?
Yeah, we've been asked the question before. So, I have I work with Harnois, so when somebody asks me a question, I usually send it to the engineers, and that's what they come back with is they can use it in the summer as long as they take it off in the winter, but it's not something that like a greenhouse like Harnois would want to get into. Although I'd love to see them figure something out that we could do temporarily, right? But they're more concerned about the structural integrity, what could possibly happen, and all the other stuff. So it could be something in the cards down the road because I do think capturing that water is a great thing. Like I'd love to see it happen. I know I've had a couple of customers that had just done their own sort of gutters on the side. Um, it just if it's going to be a snowy winter, you just can't have them there. They're not going to last. So.
Mm-hmm. Norm, do you have anything to add to that?
Everything in life is a cost versus benefit. And when water is easily accessible, like just turn on the tap, you've got a good source, you've got a good pond, you've got a good well, whatever, that is so cheap that there's no incentive to look for an alternative. You hear stories about this huge shortage of water, like in California. So now all of a sudden, when the cost of getting your water then becomes that much higher, now all of a sudden there's an incentive to collect every drop that you've got. But I think that your best bet is still set up good drainage around the building so that the rainwater that does come easily gets moved away from the structure. So you're accomplishing that good, and then have that water drain to a reservoir so that you can pump out of that, and then you accomplish two things. You're doing your anchoring better, and you're accessing water that is already there.
And I think so that like as Brian kind of mentioned or hinted to, so there are some greenhouses that are designed to sort of accommodate that rain collection and storage, especially sort of this multi-bay system. A lot of glass houses will sort of have that. But a lot of the time, I think when we're looking at sort of that standard standalone sort of high tunnel singular structure, yeah, it's an add-on, I think, if you wanted it to be there and if that's sort of a priority for you, but it's definitely not, it's not really a common practice because we are fortunate to have that ready access to water. So I think we're just at time here. I want to ask one more question. And then yeah, thanks so much everyone for being here and for attending. I hope we didn't have too much doom and gloom with sort of the hurricane prep, but I definitely think it's top of mind these last few years. So the final question is, are there any Are there any up and coming technologies that you're excited about for greenhouses? And if not, are there any sort of tried and true technologies that you highly recommend? So, Norm, I'll toss it to you first.
I wouldn't say there's anything new on the horizon as far as what we're doing that is going to turn everything on its edge. I just think that there are an awful lot of areas that are already in existence that people can do better and pay better attention to. And so that really is my focus to improve what you're doing before jumping on a new bandwagon.
Okay, those are good words of wisdom for sure. A lot of different aspects that we can get a little bit better at to make our lives better. Brian, what do you think?
Nothing new that I can see. It's new to small growers, but automation, you've only got so many hours in a day. And then labor is the other issue, and that's been a growing concern over the last few years, especially. Um, for the amount of money you can spend on some of the new automation systems, it takes the work out of it. It's a little more, you got to kind of be a little more aware of your stuff, kind of check on it a couple times a day. But if you've got roll-ups, for example, you're hand cranking and, you know, late April, early May is kind of a good time to point out, like you're trying to grow a new crop and then all of a sudden it's 10 o'clock and it's too hot in there. Now you're stopping field work, you're running up to the greenhouse, you're opening up the side, and then the cloud's over, and then you stop, you go back, you roll it back down. You're trying to maintain a temperature to maximize your production. Automation will do that for you, and simple as a thermostat on a two roll-up motors. It can be that easy, or you can go to some of these computerized systems that hook to your phone. So if you want to look at your phone and say, okay, well, it's 28 degrees in the greenhouse and something's not working right, so I can go look at it. There's different levels there of automation, but it's definitely something to look at. It'll save you a pile of time as long as you're mindful that things happen. Motorized roll-ups, I've seen just shear off, and then the roll-up drops down and it's closed off, and there's no warning system for that. So now it's getting hot. So it's just a matter of keeping an eye on it as opposed to actually having to stop everything and go do it. And keeping your life a little easier.
No, absolutely. I definitely think there's a lot of value in automation, and I kind of like your point of you have to make sure that you kind of understand why the decisions are being made by the automation and kind of when, and you still got to check on it and you still might have to jump in and save the day. So it's
Yeah,
not a
it's not foolproof.
Yep. Yep. All
Yeah.
right, Jackie, what do you got?
There's not like there's not a lot of new stuff coming up. This like for smaller growers. There's new structures coming up for bigger growers. There's like a Tunnel Pro Plus that are for like field growers, because I think field production's become more of a challenge, and I think more people are going to go under poly for cheaper structures that they can actually do their field crops in. I like the idea of using a climate control on a greenhouse. It isn't an insurance policy. Once I keep telling the people at the nursery that I am, once a plant's dead, it's dead. So you can't bring it back. So it does help. There's systems now that will help not just vent the greenhouse. It'll give you data, gives you a kind of like points that you know where you need to act and what you need to do. It does a good job in helping you. Some systems also even will irrigate your crops for you. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do. The problem is it's the small growers. It's expensive. It's hard to swallow the price of it. But there is some innovation grants and certain things that you could probably apply for that might be able to get you to that next level. Maybe after you grow for a year, and then go back and maybe look at the automatic sides and the automatic controllers to do different things for inside your greenhouse that'll run heat, ventilation, you name it. So yeah, there's new computers for greenhouses coming up all the time, and a lot of them are very user friendly, and I think that's, if I was a new grower, I'd probably go in that direction. So
yeah. No, awesome. I agree. Yeah, it's a tough question because it kind of that up and coming or what's really going to work well for you is going to depend on the grower, the situation, how many years experience you have, all of that stuff. But I like when we can give less vague answers. So you guys did a great job at that. Definitely, environmental control. We have the ability to basically curate that growing environment the best we can for our plants so that they do the best that they can. And that in itself is really a great opportunity. So whatever you need to do to sort of optimize that, whether that's starting out with like a temperature and humidity reader you can access on your phone, or if that's starting to be automatic irrigation or roll up sides that you don't need to hand crank every time, I think is really going to go a long way. So thank you guys so much for sticking around. Thank you so much for our panelists, Brian, Norm, and Jackie. I really appreciate your feedback, your experience, and just openness to talk about, sometimes things don't work, but it's it's good to make sure no one else is making that mistake after you 50 times over again.
yeah.
So yeah, thanks so much, guys. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to myself or anyone on the panel. And yeah, hopefully we can do something like this again soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.